This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Home Gadget Geeks, show number 539, recorded on July 21st, 2022. Here on Home Gadget Geeks, we cover all the favorite tech gadgets that find their way into your home. News, reviews, product updates, and conversation, and a lot of conversation tonight, all for the average tech guy. I'm your host, Jim Collison, broadcasting live from the AverageGuy.tv studios here in a stormy, I got the weather radar up and threatening thunderstorms again here in the Midwest, but I think we'll be okay during the show. Of course, we post a show with world-class show notes, and there'll be a few out there tonight for this one, out at the AverageGuy.tv. Big thanks to Ed Sullivan, who joined us last week. A big conversation around e-bikes and some of those bike technologies, cycling technologies, Garmin versus Peloton and e-bikes. Appreciate Ed, you coming out last week to do that, and appreciate the conversation. If you haven't listened to it, go back 538. Karn Jajoo is our host today. He is a domain expert, and if you're wondering what that is, we'll find out here in a second. But Karn, thanks for coming out and joining us on Home Gadget Geeks. Great to have you this evening.
Great to be here.
Give us a little bit of background, like where you live today, what you do, your role, your position. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I live in Dubai. I've been here for about a year, and prior to this, I was in Mumbai, India. I was born and raised in India. Lived in a few different parts. And I've been working with Radix. It's a company that owns domain extensions. So we are a registry, and a lot of you folks might be familiar with the registrar, the likes of GoDaddy and Namecheap, and so on. So they are the ones who actually retail and sell domain names. But a registry is the company that owns the domain extension itself. So again, people are not usually familiar with that side of the business. But yeah, there is somebody who owns and operates that extension, and then there's an entire value chain of registrars and resellers and so on. So Radix is a registry that owns and operates 10 new domain extensions. And we'll come to what new domain extensions are and some of the ones that we own and operate. But yeah, we're the biggest new domain registry. So there were a lot of new domain extensions that launched. They were announced in 2012 by ICANN. ICANN is this non-government, non-profit organization, stands for Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And they are responsible for, Internet Protocol, space allocation, DNS, which is Domain Name System Management, and so on. So they allowed private players to apply for new extensions. So, we've, for almost 30 plus years, we've only had a .com and .net and so on. Those are called legacy extensions. And then you have country code extensions like .us or .in or .it, .de. And then there were some new generic extensions that also came into being, like a .pro. And then there's a whole lot of extensions which one might think mean something else because they were repurposed. Like a .co or a .ai or a .io, because they take on a whole new meaning in the context of technology, but they are also CCTLDs. So they are also country code extension for some small, region or country, but they've just been repurposed as a new extension. And new domain extensions, there's more than 1,000 of them, were conceived in 2012, and like I said, private companies were allowed to apply for them. So you have all sorts of organizations from Amazon, Google, to private companies like ours that applied for one or more such extensions. So yeah, there's an interesting process how you actually end up getting those and how those are awarded, and how you become eligible for those. But so we were successfully able to own 10 such extensions, and we operate them. And so we are in the business of making sure people increasing awareness for these extensions, increasing adoption of these extensions, and ultimately operating them.
Yeah. Karn, the you said, 10, 12 years ago. I remember this when they were like, "Hey," they made a big deal about it. "We're going to start offering these new extensions." And I thought there would just be this gigantic explosion of new things. And it just didn't happen for the most part. It's kind of been a slow rolling, and it's successful now. I've kind of looked at the numbers of the revenue numbers of what those extensions are starting to bring in. Why do you think 10 years ago it was such a slow adoption? Was it because people only really knew .com, knew .org, knew .net, those kinds of things? Why do you think it took so long for the adoption to get to kind of take off?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, the people are familiar with a .com and a .net, which have been around for more than 30 years. They're very ubiquitous. It's very difficult for a new entrant to sort of make a dent when the incumbent has just been so prevalent and been around for so long. But that's just one of the reasons. It's changing that mindset and awareness. That's obviously one of the big challenges. But when I said it started in 2012, it wasn't until a few years later that the extensions actually became live, and many of them still haven't launched yet. So it was actually sort of a slow process, and they didn't all launch together. So our first extensions launched in 2014. That's when I joined the company, coincidentally. So .website was the first extension that we launched. Um, and the most recent one that we launched wasn't until a couple of years back, around 2018, 2019. So you're completely right. There's been more than 1,000 of them. Not all of them are meant for everyone. So almost 500 of them are actually owned by brands themselves. So there is a Audi or there is a Abbott. A lot of banks have their own brand, and those are supposed to be not accessed or used, or at least owned by anybody aside from the brand itself. It just provides the brand a lot more control over what they do with it. So you can have like a dot geeks, for example, if geeks is your brand. And then you can have a lot of different domains within .geeks, but those are all owned by just you as an entity, and you might not offer it to others to own and operate them. So Google, for example, has .google, which they use for themselves, but then they also own a lot of other extensions, like .new or .soy. There's a bunch of them. So I think it's a mix. Um, Fortunately, we actually own a very interesting mix of what we consider as very generic extensions. So like a .online, which like everybody understands. If you're
Mhm.
online and you're using a .online, or a .site, which literally just means a website. So we own both the .website and .site, and then certain industry specific extensions, like .tech, which is for the tech industry, or .store, which is for e-commerce. Um, .space. So yeah, the adoption curves have been very different depending on what the extension is, how it's been marketed, who owns it, what do they intend to do with it, and so on and so forth.
When you think about creating your own extension, you want to go after this. Certainly, I'm not going to GoDaddy or Hover and buying. I just don't go
Yeah.
buy it. And I thought I remember that these are very expensive to set up and to purchase, get to own it. What is it costing these days to get that, to kind of get ownership of that dot store or the dot online?
Yeah. Yeah. So when ICANN rolled out or invited applicants for this, I believe just the application fee was around $185,000. So just to be able to apply to own one of these with no guarantee of you actually eventually owning it, you still have to shell out that amount. And this fee might actually go up in future rounds. So there was a round that happened then, and then they might do another round some years from now, depending on the needs and feedback from people and users and registries and registrars. Um, and applying for an extension doesn't mean that you are assured of getting it. So if there are multiple applicants for the same extension, and unless an applicant has, say, like a trademark over an extension that supersedes any other region's need for that, um, then it's fair game for multiple entities to apply for it, and then it goes into an auction. So for the first time, there were certain auctions designed wherein there were public auctions, private auctions, but eventually you had to outbid others in order to own the rights to that extension. And not every time did the company actually end up getting the extension they applied for. For example, Amazon had a very hard time. I'm not sure if they still have it, but they never got hold of .amazon, even though they own a whole lot of other extensions. Because Amazon is also a region, and they have certain rights over that name. It was the same case with a lot of other ones, like dot Mumbai, I believe. There was a private company interested in applying for that, but then because it's also a city, so the city gets the first precedence over owning it. Um, so yeah, but for the generic extension, something like a .online or a .store, if there are 5 companies or 10 companies that have applied for it, then they can either settle it among themselves, or I can help facilitate an auction, and then it's a Dutch auction, so I believe the second highest bid eventually wins it. The highest that any extension has sold for, I believe, was over $100 million actually.
Wow.
.web, which hasn't gone live. .web is owned by the same entity that owns .com. It's a publicly listed company called VeriSign. Yeah. Even we have had to outbid some really big companies in order to get some of our extensions.
Yeah, I would think when I saw .store, I thought that would be. I mean, some of these I've seen, you're kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
that you spent a lot of money. I'm not sure. .store seemed to make sense when I was reading some of the materials as I was prepping for the interview today. There's also been this thought of, because all the good .com stuff was gone a while ago, so now you can kind of get your brand with a new extension. But there's also been some talk of maybe a quicker turnaround on some of these, in other words, people paying more of a leasing fee than an owning fee, right, for some of these domains. So as we think about like .store, how does that, if I wanted .store, do I follow normal, like I'm a Hover customer, do I just go through them to get it, and then it's you guys price it? Tell me a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, it's the exact same as buying any other extension like a .com or a .us. You can go on Hover. In our case, there's almost 200 registrars or resellers that actually sell our domain. So you can, any reseller or registrar that you're familiar with is likely to offer all of our top extensions across all geos. And you're right, to some extent it is sort of like as long as you keep paying the renewal, you are going to own, you're going to retain the ownership of that name. If you fail to pay, which happens more often than you would think, and every day there are thousands of domains that drop in .com, there's an entire aftermarket based out of this activity. But it's the same as owning a .com. If you don't pay the renewal fee, you get certain time, then you get a certain grace period, but then eventually the domain gets deleted, becomes available again in the market, and somebody else can come and grab it. So it's the same for a .store as it is for a .com. The fee may vary. Some extensions can cost a lot more. Like when I say the fee, I'm talking about buying at the primary market. So the hand registration, might be $10 for a .com, might be $5 for a .online, might be $25 for a .store, might be $80 for a .io. So that might vary. And then of course, aftermarket is a completely different ballgame.
Yeah, that's always a little scary. I've gone into, look, hey, I wonder if this is available. You look it up. Oh, you can buy this from somebody. So I have the average guy.tv. That TV extension was one of those. That's a country extension that
Correct.
has kind of been repurposed. That country's actually probably made a lot of money off that TV
Yeah.
extension, right? And owning that. But if I wanted to get the average guy.store, Hover is running a sale, right? That first
Yeah.
year is always going to be a special price. And then it would be looks like it's about $65 a year after that. Not bad. It's
Yeah.
one of the more expensive ones. Art is available. That'd be 20. .me, which I used to have. I used to have the average guy.me, $20. There's a .shop and a .io. And did you say you guys own .tech as well?
Yes.
So .tech is available and .site is available. 50
Yeah.
for .tech, $33 for .site. So fairly reasonable when you think about owning a property, especially like a store or a shop where you're going to be doing e-commerce through it.
Yeah.
60 $60 at the high end, 30 or 20 at the low end. Pretty, so I can still get into these pretty reasonably, right?
That's the idea. It's supposed to make see your domain. A domain is very essential to any business that is online, and which is most businesses today. There's almost 5 billion people who have access to the internet. Almost 1.9 billion websites, and there's about 370 million domains registered. Um, but about 160 million out of those 360 are .coms. So it's very, very unlikely that any new name that you think of for your business, your entity, your blog, very unlikely that the first name that you think of is actually going to be available. So, well, there's usually one of two possibilities. One, it's already being owned and somebody's already has their own shop on it. In which case, it's even less likely that you can get it. That if they already have an active business on it, very unlikely they're going to want to sell it, or it might be available in the aftermarket, but the price might not be within your budget. So it's a very natural evolution. .com is saturated. You literally can't find any dictionary word available. If it is, um, um, I believe, unless it's like a two-word or a three-word, and even in that case, it's very unlikely to be available for a hand registration. So it's a very natural evolution, very similar to phone numbers. They just used to be 4 or 5 digits in the US, but now you have 10 digits because there are more people who require numbers, and each number is supposed to be unique. These are all non-fungible, right? You cannot have two people owning the same URL or a phone number. Or postal codes used to be just 2 digits, and then eventually zip codes became 5 digits because there are just so many more zonal areas, and so you need more digits in your zip code. So it's the same with domains. If there are more and more people coming online, and the idea was never for everybody to be on .com. Com just means commerce, net means network. They were not supposed to include everyone. Um, so the idea is to not just make domain ownership more easier, accessible, sort of democratize that, but to also organize it in a certain way. So, if you're a lawyer and if you have a law practice, maybe you should consider .law or a .lawyer. If you're a photographer, maybe .photography. It just makes a lot more sense given the context of your business rather than everybody being on a .com. So if you were
Mhm.
to think of like a real estate, analogy, it doesn't make sense for everything to be in one block. You should maybe have businesses together and manufacturing industries together and suburban areas where people are living together in a different area. So it just makes sense to organize um, spaces in a certain way, so that similar kind of businesses are maybe together.
20 years ago, 30 years ago, when there were just a handful of these names, pretty easy to remember, and yet
Yeah,
I think today I get the sense, and again, you're in this industry, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like we're like people. Well, let me talk about my own habits. When I want to look for a brewery, I'll just
yeah,
put in the name of the brewery in Google or Bing or whatever, find it, click on it, and go to it. I'm not necessarily, nor are they, I wouldn't go. One of my favorites is Lucky Bucket Brewery. I'm
mhm,
not going to luckybucket.com first.
yeah.
I'm searching for it because of the .com problem. Are you guys seeing a shift? So for those customers that are buying store or are buying tech, do you guys have any way of seeing if people are, is it picking up? Are people actually using it?
Yeah, I mean, usage is one of our key metrics, of course. In fact, with .store, we have at this point uh, a bunch of artists and celebrities and YouTube personalities that are all using .store for their merchandise stores. So eventually, we want .store to become the de facto extension for if you have an e-commerce website or a merchandise store to become your de facto. extension. So if you look at the official stores for Jay-Z, for Rihanna, for Shakira, Maroon 5, Leonard Skinner, Jimi Hendrix, they're all on a dot store actually. So if you just Google Rihanna store, the second or the third result is going to be Rihanna dot store. Her original or her previous URL might have been something longer, Rihanna, artist something.com, because maybe somebody else just took Rihanna, because that's the first name. Somebody else could have also just registered it a while back. But yeah, so the idea here is that the more stores that you have on dot store, the more Google is also going to be cognizant of that. So Google as a search engine, it treats all extensions equally. It doesn't discriminate. But of course, the kind of websites that are going to be on that extension are eventually going to make a difference in what kind of results you see. So, there's a reason that you would always trust an organization that is on a .edu, because you know that they are always going to be a legitimate a college or a school, or some sort of an entity that is a reliable educational institute, because you can't register a .edu unless you're one of those. And so anytime that you search for, say, like a Georgia Tech or North Carolina, one of the top results that you see would be the .edu, which would be that university. In the same way, if your intent is to purchase goods or merchandise, it's likely that over time you're likely to see the .store as the top results, because the Google algorithm is going to start taking that into account over time,
With
because there'll just be so many stores.
with dot store, are you guys doing some validation or checking that it's not some scammer setting up a store? I mean, is there some of those things that go on with that?
We do. No, absolutely. That's something that we do very proactively. We have an in-house anti-abuse team, and so anytime there is a complaint, or proactively, if you find out that there are, scammers or phishing websites, or anyone who's any trademark infringements that are very obvious, we take them down. Yeah, I mean, it's a fine balance, because you don't want to infringe upon legitimate users, but anytime that the use violates the terms of either the term that the registrar has with that registrant, or some basic requirements that you're supposed to be following when putting up a website or content out there. We do take it down, which is with the same intent. We want to make sure that our namespace is secure, is reliable, you can trust it. Again, you don't want to be. There's a reason a lot of just businesses don't use a .biz, even though biz is supposed to imply a business, or you don't see a lot of entities on a .info, because it just ended up being used by so many of these sort of scammy users that people just don't rely on them anymore.
Brian asked a good question. Are there any of these newer website suffixes blocked, or have you had any issues with you just kind of mentioned that some of these .biz for the stuff that you guys are working with, do you have to actively kind of monitor it to make sure other organizations aren't blocking it for whatever reason?
Yes, we have to. And there's just like there is ICANN, there's an entity that actually also helps do this, to promote sort of fair usage, to make sure that no extension is being discriminated against, unless there is grounds for that. So there are certain spam filters which might catch certain extensions if there are a lot of uh, a lot of websites that are on that extension tend to have a lot of spam or abuse registrations. So those can get blocked in spam filters, but we actively try and make sure that we are not, and our extension is not one of those.
If I did say I did purchase the site, I bought Jim Collison bought dot store, and I was having problems with it. Would that support come to you guys to rectify, or does that go to the domain registrar first and it routes through? How does that work usually?
Generally, the first point of contact for the customer is the domain registrar.
Okay.
The customer might not even know that there is an entity like us also
Yeah.
working
Yeah.
in the back. But yes, the domain registrar can also raise that issue with us. Like I said, we have a team that actively looks into this. But generally, this is not a problem. We try and make sure that we are proactively, ensuring that our customers don't face this issue with our extensions.
Okay. Yeah. Brian asked another good question, and I was kind of getting to this. He said, recently when I'm looking up a business, I've used the Maps app, often now people are doing location-based searches. In other words,
Mhm.
they're going to the map and they're saying, and I just did this. We were out of town, and I was like, I wonder what there is to eat around here. And I didn't
Yeah.
search for it. I went to the map and blew it out to see the restaurants that were around the area.
Yeah.
Certainly, that circumvents, domain names, right? And I would think with the importance of the App Store, both in Android and on iPhone, that eventually maybe these domains become less important. Are you seeing any of that, or are the apps cutting in on this space at all?
I think this question does get sort of um, there's been a lot of, I guess, discussion within the industry also about this. Ultimately, I don't think that will ever happen for various reasons. I don't think we're going to switch from websites to just apps. And a domain name is more than just just typing in that URL. There's many unique ways that you can use it. I was reading Balaji Srinivasan, who's the ex-CTO of Coinbase, very popular guy on Twitter. He just published a book called The Network State, and each of his chapters actually also has a URL, so you can sort of type that in and you go straight to that page on Kindle. Just something that I just came across a couple of days ago. But I think one of the main reasons people still prefer having their own website or their own domain is it gives a lot more autonomy on what you have there. You're not building on somebody else's property. Ultimately, if you're on the App Store, there are certain gatekeepers. In this case, there's a certain duopoly, and you guys have all heard of cases where things don't go down as well with Apple. They want to take a certain cut, and then you have to find a ways to circumvent that, or they might just decide to take your app out of the App Store. So beyond a certain level, things aren't really in your control. Or, for example, if you just have a store that markets on Instagram or Facebook and you're relying heavily on them for traffic or finding new customers, but then they make certain policy changes, and then that can completely wreak havoc on the kind of visits that you're getting or the amounts that you're spending in order to get customers. So the thing with domains is ultimately you sort of own that land. Nobody can, as long as you're paying that renewal fee and you're not doing something absurdly illegal with it. It's very unlikely that somebody is going to take that away from you. That it's not that easy for that to happen. Um, it took more time for Elon Musk to get the domain Tesla.com than it took him to actually launch the first Roadster or the Model 3, because somebody owned Tesla, and
Yeah.
you despite how much money you throw at them, you can't just usurp that domain unless you have very legitimate reasons to do that. So if I was to own Tesla and if I wanted to operate a blog on Tesla.com, and or talk about Nikola Tesla and his inventions, I had all the rights to do that. And I could get a lot of traffic from Tesla. So as long as I'm not monetizing it in such a way that I'm harming their brand, essentially doing anything illegal, I still have a lot more autonomy over that domain. So I think that's one of the reasons that control, owning your own audience in, not having this gatekeeper or this third entity that's sort of, that's the conduit of people coming to you, having a lot more information, where your audience is coming from, directly engaging with them. I think that's something that's very unique to having your own website and your own domain.
What about in the personal space? So since I started looking, JimCollison.com has been taken by some
Yeah,
realtor in Washington State. And
yeah,
I keep I've got a thing set up so that if he ever doesn't pay it, right, I can go
yeah,
in and
yeah,
snag
yeah,
it and some
yeah,
of those other, but he's pretty reliable and he pays his bills. And I
yeah.
don't think I'm ever going to get JimCollison.com. As you think in as you think about this space, how important is a personal web space? Like, how important is it for me to have Jim Collison, my name? I have the average guy.tv, but that's kind of
Yeah.
the network brand, so to speak. It's not my brand. How important do you think it is that I have Jim Collison.tech or Jim Collison.site? What do you
Yeah,
think about personal sites?
I mean, I think everybody should have a personal site for one. If nothing else, you could just take that name and redirect it to your LinkedIn. There's absolutely no harm in that.
Mm, mhm.
That's the easiest thing you could do. Um, it also depends on if you're a public figure. If you are an entity that's trying to create a personal brand, then then it's a no-brainer. You absolutely must have it. You can create like a link in bio on that. You can post links to your social, your blog, your website, maybe have some info about yourself. Um, but it's one of the easiest ways to sort of put yourself out there. A lot of people have their CVs there. A lot of people who use Notion, for example, and have some notes or have some information about themselves and want to publish it online. Notion allows you to do that. Interestingly, they use Notion.site for that. So you could publish you can publish this for free. So it's a subdomain on Notion, so you don't have to pay for it separately. You don't have to pay for hosting or the domain also for it. Sort of like WordPress blogs. But yeah, I think it's very important to have that. It also depends on how sort of seriously you want to get taken. What sort of authority does your domain um, does it can border on maybe vanity, but I think more than that, it's usually how serious you are about your brand or as a person. You'll notice that a lot of celebrities or a lot of known people will actually sometimes use an even shorter, like a domain hack. So they will use like the last two letters of like a country code,
Right, right.
and maybe their name in the first few letters. So like Naval, for example, I believe has nav.al. But just looking at that name, that this has to be somebody who's obviously big enough or famous enough, or has enough followers that they would own an entity like that.
Yeah,
And if you don't have the .com, I think that's completely all right. In fact, if you have a common first name and a last name, it's very unlikely that the .com is going to be available.
yeah.
Which is why there are a lot more extensions now, which are a lot more suitable for a personal branded website. There are a lot of people who use .online. Um, a lot of people who use .space for this reason. A lot of people
Mm,
use .site, and these are
yep.
these are three just from our portfolio. .me used to be very popular.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think even Jim Collison.me at this point is taken, but
Yeah,
tech is available. Like I said, online is available, store is available. Those are the three that come to mind. What would you've known me for an hour, not even that. Let's just say 45 minutes.
yeah,
Yeah, but I have a podcast. I might have some merch, not a lot though. But I'm a YouTube influencer. I might have that. What would you recommend for a guy like me? Like, what should if I was going to snag some of these? What should I
yeah.
snag?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense for you to own multiple extensions also. It can depend on the end use. So a lot of brands do that. Like the airline has Emirates.com, which is the corporate website, but then Emirates.store is their merchandise store. Or Viacom has, Viacom.com, but then Viacom.tech is their tech sort of website where they talk about, technology behind their companies and so on. Airbnb has Airbnb.design. So there's a lot of companies would use .tech, for example, to talk about a lot of their development work and so on. So I think in your case, you could consider possibly there's a .audio. I don't know how much
Yeah.
if that sounds interesting. But yeah, if you have a merch store, I think a .store is very obvious. Even Netflix has one. Netflix has a .shop. So this is it's becoming increasingly common for companies to separate, depending on the end use of that domain, and maybe have multiple domains rather than having like a subdirectory or a subdomain. Um, I think .tv is pretty cool for what you're doing.
Yeah, it worked. I
Um,
got it early.
yeah,
That was Leo Laporte. He had a twit.tv, and I thought I didn't know it was a country. I thought that
yeah.
was that was supposed to be for like media. So I just bought that thinking that
There is
only
.media,
later.
there is .press, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then .tech, just because you do have it's primarily a tech, podcast. We do have a lot of podcasts on. There's a Miami podcast that is on a .tech. There's a bunch of YouTube folks that are essentially, you could think of them as podcasters.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, so they are using a .tech. But again, so if you are, if the content that you're producing is primarily related to tech, it makes a lot of sense for you to be on a
Yeah.
.tech.
Yeah. Yeah, Dot Audio is available, but it's $175 a year. So whoever owns Dot Audio, it's pretty expensive. I mean, that's
Yeah.
way more than you guys are charging for that. Does and you may have said this earlier, and I may not just have heard it the way I wanted to, but does Google direct traffic based on the extension? So if it has a dot audio extension or if it has a dot store extension, does it, because Google does all these fancy things with bringing up maps, and it's kind of intuitive that way. Are they doing anything smart on their end to help where the extension would mean more than just an address?
And one example I can think of is you mentioned Google, stores, showing up on the map,
Right,
and then
right.
you can.
Yeah.
So Google has something called as Google My Business (GMB), where what they've essentially done is they use a domain called business.site. So they acquired it from us actually, and it's a great generic name. Um, and so if you're an entity, if you have a store or anything that's listed on Google, you get a free one-page website, which is a subdomain on a .business.site. So there are now millions of such
Mm,
one-page websites, and all it does is you don't have to put in any dev effort. You don't even have to be familiar with like the UI of a website builder. It just pulls out information that it already has, like your address, your location, like a brief description, maybe some photos, and just creates like a one-page website. And what it basically does is makes it a lot easier for that URL to be used by that business. So I've seen a lot of people use it in their, WhatsApp, stat, like the status of their chats, or so you can sort of just go there, and then essentially it's like a website where you will find all their information without them having to do anything like buying a domain or purchase hosting or having to create a website or using a website builder. So I know that Google also wants to enable small businesses as much as possible. I know that's one way that they have done this. um, um, but yeah, I'm sure there are other ways that they're probably using domains also.
mm.
I know. I mean, some of the extensions that they use themselves, like a .new, they have very interesting ways that I think a lot of people aren't familiar with. I believe, you can type sheet.new and it'll just open up like a new Google sheet. So it's also domains are also used as a shortener. So a lot of times you'll notice that a lot of companies use a shortener, like a t.co for like Twitter, or so if you don't want like a generic, uh, you know, um, branded shortener like a Bitly, but you want like a custom branded shortener, you can use like a G dot tech, could be like a shortener for Geeks Tech podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's well, certainly with there being less competition, I can get some of the shorter, I have homegadgetgeeks.com. So
Yeah,
I was fortunate to get that one, but it's still pretty long. Like, so
yeah,
home gadget geeks dot com. Oh, I
yeah,
spelled geeks wrong, whatever. Right. And so that, I could put HGG dot, I don't know if it's available, but I could do
yeah.
HGG dot tech,
Exactly.
make it,
So some of our most popular. So in Radix, I actually manage what we call our premium portfolio. So again, so it's sort of like real estate. The more valuable some entity is, the more expensive it is likely to be. So some of the names which are very generic, something like a business dot site or a magazine dot store, these cost more than a standard domain does. So it could be a few $1,000s. Some of them go into six figures and seven figures. With .com, you have seven-figure sales happening every other week. A lot of them are not publicly disclosed, so you might not even find out about them. But there are plenty of them that are owned by known public companies as well. Um, but the most popular premium domains that we sell in our extensions are our short letters. So
yeah.
2 character, 3 character, 4 character. More than half of our premium domains are 4 characters or less. And that's because, again, the shorter the domain, the more easier it is to remember, the more memorable it is, the better it looks on a business card, the less likely somebody is to forget it. It's more likely to be an English word. And all of these characteristics are what make a domain premium. And it's very unlikely that you can afford a domain of your choice in a .com that is going to be 3 or 4 letters.
Yeah.
It's going to be at least 100, 200K for any domain that's an English word and that's 4 letters. So,
This is the first time I've seen or heard this idea of tiered pricing on this. I know it's
yeah,
existed, but so hgg.site,
yeah,
379, 379, let's say
yeah,
380. HGG.online, 380. So again, these are very simplified,
yeah.
they're very simplified sites, and imagine they're expecting they're expecting the demand to be a little bit higher, right?
Well, I mean, the idea with offering this at the tier price is also not to charge a higher upfront fee. So rather than maybe charging you $5,000 upfront, which might seem like if you're just starting out and you're not sure how things will work out, or you haven't raised funding yet, it's probably a lower risk for you to spend the 370 bucks right now, and then if things go well, you would be okay with just paying that annual fee, right? It's sort of like a SaaS subscription. You don't want to pay Microsoft like $20,000 upfront, or Amazon, $50,000 upfront for your needs. You'd rather pay them basis your need, and as in how the business works out. So that's the idea behind our pricing model also. So if we think that the domain is worth maybe like a few $1,000s, we priced it at $300 as an annual fee. So it's to make it sort of easier for end users.
Yeah. Yeah. HGG.shop is $2,600, but
Yeah,
HGG.studio, $90. So that would
there you
be,
go.
if I was looking for, and that actually that kind of makes sense, right? The Home Gadget Geek Studio. It's a little bit different branding. I did this
Yeah,
weird thing because I did a podcast network. So I had the average guy.tv network. And then we put shows underneath it, and Home Gadget Geeks just
yeah.
happened to be one of those. But yeah, HGG.studio, not a bad way, maybe not a bad way to go if I'm thinking about trying to get a shorter domain, to make it work.
Yeah,
HomeGadgetGeeks.com, I've got that. So that part works out pretty well.
yeah.
Karn, as we look ahead to the future, what are you guys thinking about for the future? And maybe even in the IoT space, or in virtual reality, in that space. These are two emerging, technologies that are coming. Are you guys is there anything that you're looking for or looking at ahead as we think of these emerging technologies?
Definitely. So those um, the NFT and crypto and blockchain and IoT space is actually among the most popular in terms of keywords that are being registered in domains. So
Mm,
some of
in
the
crypto.
highest selling keywords have all been from these sort of areas. Um, and because there's part of the reason is also because these industries, I guess, also understand and appreciate digital assets maybe a little more. So they are more likely to adopt them and more likely to spend on them. And they understand that this is an investment, in your brand, and they probably rely a lot more on their online identity rather than their offline. They're not brick and mortar sort of companies. So there's definitely been an upswing over there, just like there has been an upswing in e-commerce because of the pandemic. The adoption just went up in 2 months than it, more so than it did in like the last 5, 10 years. So it's changing the game a lot. I think one thing that will never change is it's always going to be about location, location, location. So if your shop is on the Fifth Avenue, you're always going to get more footfalls. So good names will always do better. Always be easier to do business rather than longer names or difficult to remember names. Um, Something else that might change is just the way, I guess, domains are offered. So, we use the domain name system, which is sort of like the phone book of the internet, which comes with certain sort of reliability, and there are certain systems in place. But then there are also NFT domains, which are built on smart contracts on public domains, public blockchains. So something you might have seen this on a lot of Twitter users, a lot of tech folks, especially using .eth. So that's an Ethereum name service. So these are basically decentralized outside the DNS. So there's no organization like ICANN behind it to sort of ensure safety or protect against trademark infringement and so on. There are handshake domains, which is again a peer-to-peer network, and the ownership is linked to a blockchain key. So again, there's no who is ownership. So there's no registration record.
Centralization, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there
Yeah.
are certain advantages for it, but it's too soon to tell. How this will sort of evolve. Um, but the idea is the same. Domain names were designed so that people don't have to remember like a long numeric IP address for websites. So
Yeah.
similarly,
Yeah.
people right now are using their Ether, .eth names for their crypto wallets. So that's just one way that they're using it. But it's a little too soon to tell how this might change over time as adoption sort of increases and just becomes a little more mainstream.
Yeah, there's never been anything nefarious going on in the crypto space that we would need to worry about or any of those kinds of things. We've talked about crypto on the show a lot, and it's kind of it's worse than the wild west in a lot of ways. So it always those always decentralized things. You kind of think, oh yeah, this should work. In history is not in its favor in a lot of ways around that. So it's a tough choice. Anything, Karn? Thanks. I do want to thank you for your time. But anything else I didn't ask or I didn't cover that's important in this space before I let you get back to maybe taking a nap before work starts today?
Um, yeah, I mean, I would recommend anybody who's serious about their presence online. You don't think about domain names until the time that you are about to sort of launch that business. And there's this running joke on Twitter that there are these serial entrepreneurs who end up acquiring like a lot of names for each of their ideas, and they may not always end up doing something with it. So, domains have to do a lot with having ideas and having these. You want to put something out there, and you probably need to get a domain. So it's always good to be a little proactive about this, to be a little creative about it. And now that you have all these new choices, it makes a lot more sense to maybe spend a little time and understand which domain extension probably fits you best, and maybe do a little research about what other companies and entities are using that extension. Is that going to benefit you in some way over the others? Will that help you stand out? You know, would you rather be just like everybody else who's like on a .com or .net, or would you rather be like on a .space? So which could be pretty cool. So um, I think it's still very early stages, like you said. Even though it's been 6, 7, 8 years, new extensions only have about 6, 7% of the share, but it's an increasingly growing share of the pie. You'll see more and more like Y Combinator startups that are now switching to new extensions. A lot more of them are taking up like a .io or a .co or a .xyz or a .tech or a .network and so on. Less than like 50% of them in the last two batches were on a .com. So startups are usually at the forefront of adopting these, but then they are just probably a little ahead of the curve over there. So I think as more and more people become familiar with them, and that's one of the things that we are trying to do, I think they'll become more mainstream. And with the generations that sort of come after us, it's just going to be uh, to them they're not going to be encumbered with the knowledge of having one extension just for 20, 30 years and then these becoming new. For them, these are all just going to be around at the same time. So they may come with a very different mindset than probably you and I had.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always changing. You never
Yeah,
know. It's just always, you think, just recently, VR has been around for a while, but
yeah,
it's really begun to take off in some spaces. And all of a sudden I'm like, my kids are talking about it. I'm like, well, maybe I do need to get a headset and maybe I do need to start thinking about this just from from a podcasting space. How would I podcast different if I started podcasting into VR first, right? Or in addition to it, right? What could that look like? If folks wanted to follow you or get in touch with you or a conversation, what's the best way to do that for you?
I mean, you can reach me on my email, Karn@radix.email. Again, .email is not one of ours, but yes, we use it because it makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
with an email. I mean, I'd never get blocked. So for some of the people who are concerned, our corporate address is on a .website, radix.website, and our emails are on .email, so
Yeah.
Karn@radix.email. And I'm also on social media, so on Twitter, Instagram. It's a rather unique name, so wouldn't be
Yeah.
difficult to find me.
J A, is that right? Jajoo, right? Is your
Yes,
last name? Did I
yes,
spell that right? Okay, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Karn. I tracked you down on LinkedIn, so when you wake up in the morning, you can connect to me on LinkedIn, and
Sounds good.
we'll
Yeah, I mean, happy to help you with any domain needs,
yeah,
anything that you might need some advice with. I mean, it's a niche industry, and
yeah,
it's actually a fairly tight knit industry. Like everybody knows everyone.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm always happy to help friends and people who might need some advice on what domain to get. Is this a fair price? What else can I consider? Is this representing my business well? If I want to expand to some other things, should I consider getting these for defense?
Yeah.
Maybe I don't want to use it, but just for brand protection. So yeah, happy to help anytime.
Always great to know. I do a Saturday morning podcast called Ask the Podcast Coach, and we chat with podcasters, all around the world. This domain idea comes up from time to time, so I feel like I'm a little better educated now because I spent some time with you and have maybe something new to talk about. So, Karn, thanks for coming on, and thanks for your time. I greatly appreciate it. Great having you as a guest. We'll get you back to bed so that you can. Thanks for waking up at 4 a.m. for me, and I appreciate it. Keep Dubai safe for us as well.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure
All right,
being
guys.
here.
Take care. Have a great morning and a
Bye.
great Friday. You bet. Take care. Big thanks to Karn for coming on and having that conversation with us from Dubai, and always great. Just an interesting topic that I found through one of the podcast channels, and I thought, we haven't had a discussion on domains in a while. This would be a good topic to talk about. I hope you've enjoyed it. John Big says in the chat, I'm going to buy all the a dot or dot a Rainer extensions and auction them off. And Tony pretty quickly says that probably not the greatest investment, but you guys all know those people, right? Who have 30 or maybe you don't, but I do, that have 30 or 40 domains. I think Dave McCabe used to be one of these guys that would have an idea, he'd buy the domain, right? I mean, and that bug hasn't bit me. I think I've owned maybe 6 in any given time. The average guy.tv, the average guy.me. I think I had Jim Collison.me at one point, but not necessarily a lot of domains that I've purchased. But I've always had some question about these extensions, and so excited to get some information around them and be able to chat. So Karn, again, thanks for coming on, and very well done. Thanks for being our guest. A couple reminders going forward. One, I think we have a guest coming back next week, Ekarsh, who has got that whole home audio speaker setup that we're going to take a look at. He had been on a month or two ago, and then had an internet fail here, and it didn't work. So he's coming back. Dan Lefebvre is coming. Dan's a friend of the show and actually a supporter on Ask the Podcast Coach. Dan's going to come on. We're going to have a good chat. We're going to talk about wine the week after that. I've got a wine expert coming on who's also a gadget geek. We're going to talk a little bit about that space. So, we've had Cody Wheat on before and talking about it, but got a special guest coming in that you haven't met before for that. And then the week after that, the 18th of August, Aaron Lawrence is back to chat. And the week after that, Mike Uyghur is back. No, just for a week. Just for a week. Don't get too excited. But Uyghur will be back, and he's done some things and wanted to catch up with us, and he's coming back on to do it. So we're excited to have him back in the seat, at least chatting with us. John says wine gadgets will be interesting. I think so. It'll be an interesting conversation going forward. Big thanks to Christian over there at Maple Grove Partners. Get secure, reliable, high-speed hosting. Speaking, if you're going to get some domains, you need some hosting for it, right? And you should get some domains. If you don't have one, you should have one. Like, just do this. Go to hover.com. I wonder if I have a code for that. I wonder if I have that thing. I think I do. TheAverageGuy.tv/hover. So do that. So go back. Go to TheAverageGuy.tv/hover. Search for your name and see what comes up. And maybe one of these, .online, .website, .site, .space, .store, .tech. Maybe one of those of the 10, there's 10 of them, will show up. It'd be interesting to see what you get. What would be interesting to you? If you find an interesting one, send me an email, Jim@theaverageguy.tv, or you can drop it down there in on YouTube comments. If you're not going to buy it, definitely drop it down there because you're not worried about somebody snagging it like John is going to snag Tony's sites. But check it out. Anyways, get secure, reliable, high speed. After you find the domain, then get with Christian. MapleGrovePartners.com. Plan start as little as $10 to set up a sweet WordPress site for you, and you can if you've never done a site for yourself, maybe now is the time to get it done. Maybe now's the time. What are you waiting for? MapleGrovePartners.com. Again, theaverageguy.tv/hover. If you want to join us on Discord, theaverageguy.tv/Discord. By the way, lots of great conversation. Not very much spam. Not a lot, but just enough. So if you're looking for a group that's in the Goldilocks zone, not too much, not too little, but just right, join us in the Discord group, and we'd love to have you out there doing that with us. And I think theaverageguy.tv/Patreon, if you want to join us as a Patreon supporter. And if you made it all the way to this point, why wouldn't you? I got a plan for $5. Just helps kind of, do some things around here to keep things rolling there. And Justin, don't spam the Discord. No, he won't. I'm sure he won't, but go to the cigar spot, Justin. You can spam the cigar area of the, I put it away. I got a sweet cigar that I could have shown. I've never seen one like this. It's pretty sweet, but maybe next week we'll bring it up. We are live. In Joe, Uyghur said he'd come back. He did say he'd come back from time to time. I can't get him every week because he's, spending time with his family and those kinds of things, but he will be back from time to time. And so it's good. I miss him. It'll be good to have him back. We are live every Thursday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern, out here at theaverageguy.tv/live. I am trying to when we have guests like this, I'm trying to shorten these up a little bit just so I don't keep guests for forever. And so if you haven't come out and joined us live, if you're listening to the recorded version of this, you're like, oh, it's too long live. Well, it's not always that long. We're under an hour tonight. Come out and join us. Love to have you and love to see you. And we'll be back next week. So come out to theaverageguy.tv/live Thursday, 8 p.m. Central. Get it done. Have a good evening. With that, we'll say goodbye.